Drew here, and sometimes I really, really hate being right. But the minute that Zabel entered the frame in Mare of Easttown, I thought that he was either too nice for an HBO show, which meant he was either going to get his head smashed or shot in the head or going to, have his head slammed in a car door, but something was going to happen to his head, or he was actually not a nice guy. And as the evidence mounted that he actually was as nice and as well-meaning as he appeared to be, there was a moment this episode after he kisses Mare and says, "How do you know what I want?" where my wife turned to me and said, "Well, he's a goner." And I had a sinking feeling that she was right. Now, in case you're wondering if it's been confirmed whether or not he's dead, the head writer of the show, Zabel, has said that Zabel is dead. So, suspense over, and you can start mourning now. Like I said, I hate being right. I felt like the minute this character showed up, though, I felt like he was going to undercut Mare as the lead investigator, and he did serve a useful purpose in keeping her involved in the investigation after she'd been officially taken off the case. And, obviously she's going to get put back officially on the case based on the teaser for last week's episode. So he served a useful purpose in that regard, and he was someone who allowed us to see a different side of Mare, and now she can go forward tormented by whether or not she ultimately led to his death with her actions. But again, I felt like the writing was on the wall for this character pretty much this entire episode. They set up his death with a lot of scenes that were establishing the character as much as they needed to establish the character. To me, if he was going to be in future episodes, they would have left some lingering questions about him, but they kind of just set him up to die. And it seemed like it was pretty clearly a headshot when he got felled by this person that they investigated at the bar. So otherwise, this episode, it didn't really clear up a lot on the front as far as Aaron's murder was concerned, but it did clear up the fact that there are indeed two different cases going on, that Dawn's daughter had been kidnapped by this man, and Mare and Zabel, that's really confusing. I think I've been calling him Zabel a lot of the time, which is actually the name of a director on this show, the director of this show, so I get confused because it's Zabel. Why would they do that to us? But nonetheless, the character of Zabel and Mare go and track down this bar thanks to this tip they get that this man tried to strangle this prostitute. And they arrive on the scene, and I thought this scene was really pretty well directed and well done. And I think it goes to show a lot of the times I think Hollywood thinks that the bigger you go, the better you go. And to me, I just don't think that's true. I think that, one of the best movies, one of the best Westerns anyway of all time is High Noon, and it was Gary Cooper versus three men, but the stakes were more real. And I think that that's something that people oftentimes miss, is that the more you increase the stakes, the less there feels like is actually at stake a lot of the time. You have to find a way to keep it reasonable. You have to find ways to amplify the tension in the scene. And having Zabel get shot immediately was one way to do that, but just the way this whole thing played out, like someone online in an article said that it had very Silence of the Lamb vibes, and I agree completely. It reminded me a lot of the scene where Clarice arrives at Buffalo Bill's house in that film. And here, the tension, because we realize as the evidence mounts based on the things that they've discovered this episode, that this man is their suspect. A very, very generic white male. It's understandable why the prostitute couldn't think of a lot of things to describe about him, because I'm not sure I would be able to pick him up out of a lineup if I were asked to after watching this episode, even though I saw him on screen for quite a long time and found myself absolutely terrified of him. He was so nondescript, I could see myself not being able to figure out which person he was if I was asked to identify him in a lineup. But nonetheless, the tension of this scene as they realize that he's their man as the evidence mounts up. They realize that he has the vehicle, that he smokes the Winstons, and just all the details are matching. And then on top of that, the pipe starts banging, and they're sitting there trying to decide, can we pretend that we're not aware of what that actually is? Like, at what point does it become obvious that we know that he's hiding girls here? And it was an interesting situation because they could have waited, as some of the people online pointed out, and called in for backup, but then you run the risk, of course, of having him kill the girls and dispose of their bodies and bury all the evidence before they have a chance to close in and stop him. So it was a tough call, but obviously this bringing closure to this case is going to be very, very important to Mare, but having her realize that, maybe Zabel's death was her fault, I think that's going to definitely wear on her in the coming episodes. More psychological torment, just what the doctor ordered for Mare, and just when she was starting to make a breakthrough with her psychiatrist. They just can't give this character a break. But nonetheless, I felt like this was a pretty good resolution to this story. I think that, it was a little bit generic, but the way that it played out, it definitely, like I said, there was actual tension because you were watching this man watch Mare on his camera. And again, that gave me Silence of the Lamb vibes because it kind of reminded me of how he was watching her with night vision goggles in that movie, not realizing that she's being preyed upon. And the way that she fought back and, finally got to Zabel's gun and was able to finish the kidnapper off, I thought it was handled in a realistic fashion where she was a competent and tough character, but it wasn't a superhero moment. It was just, a realistic moment of bravery in the face of imminent death. Otherwise, this episode, like I said, they really did a fine job of setting up the fact that Zabel was going to die. I feel like they maybe could have done it in a more subtle fashion, but they start off this episode on this date with Mare and Zabel, where it was funny because it became very obvious very quickly that she is using him to get close to the case, and that there is this gap between them where she just doesn't really seem to have that much connection with him. Now, there's probably something wrong with Richard, but I feel like that relationship just felt a lot more natural. And this relationship kind of reminded me that sometimes you have these friends or people in a work environment that you can get along with, but outside of the work environment, you really don't have anything in common. And I definitely think there was a generational gap here where it was obvious the way that he talked about himself and his problems that, like, they're really, maybe they could have a brief fling, but there's just not much connecting these two other than their work. And there's nothing wrong with that. You can have a work connection with someone that doesn't extend past that. But it was just an awkward scene. I was just like sitting there feeling very, very awkward the whole time. And nonetheless, they had a much more intimate moment later in the episode where Zabel opened up to Mare about the fact that he didn't actually solve the case in the past, that someone had hired a PI that had basically given Zabel the pieces he needed to find the perpetrator and to rescue the kidnapped girl in that situation. And I thought it had one of the most defining lines of the show this episode when Mare says, doing something great isn't all that it's cracked up to be, because then people will just expect more from you from then on, and they won't realize that you're just the same as they are, that you're nothing special. And that's a very, very pessimistic way of looking at life, that anything you accomplish is just going to raise people's expectations of you in ways that you can't match. But I think there's some truth to this, because I feel that oftentimes we do set people on a pedestal and it's just a burden to them because they know that they probably don't live up to what we think that they are. So to me, this scene was very touching, and I previously mentioned the setup for this kiss where, Mare believes she has too much baggage to be, in a relationship with someone like Zabel. I think she might have been being nice. I don't think she actually wants to be in a relationship with him. I think she might just be saying, like, kid, we're totally different. This isn't going to work, but not actually saying it. But the fact that he says, how do you know what I want? And that he's so interested in her that he is still pushing it, even though he knows all the baggage that's in her life. I think he wants to go deeper, and Mare just doesn't have the energy for it because she's so harried, as she's consistently been throughout the series. But she opens up to him too, telling him what she did with her daughter-in-law. So I do think this was a moment where the characters were, sharing stuff with each other. Obviously, I don't think that this relationship was going anywhere long-term, but I do feel like it was a sweet and intimate moment between these two characters that really obviously foreshadowed that Zabel is going to die, because you don't have moments like this in a show like this and then have the characters actually get a happy ending. So to me, that was kind of the closure for Zabel. Makes his death all the harsher, but, in a realistic way. Otherwise, like I said, there wasn't a lot of new developments this episode on the Aaron case front. We did discover a couple things about suspects. As I suspected, it seems that the deacon had, in fact, gone to pick up Aaron, and it seems implied here from, the fact that he nods when asked, what do you mean with her, that he had actually had a sexual relationship with Aaron, possibly one that he was paying her for. But it doesn't seem like he was being a bad guy to her from the way that she talked about him in her journal. So to me, it seems likely that, he isn't the killer. I mean, I've always thought he was a red herring because he was too obvious. But watching this character, who obviously has done some bad things, having relationships with girls that he shouldn't be having relationships with, I still feel a little sad for him, because he's clearly coming to the end of his rope because he knows no one will believe him, and his entire ministry in this community is going to be lost. And what is going to become of him? And just the torment and the guilt coupled with the fact that he's just kind of at the end of his road makes me feel sympathy for him. Maybe that he doesn't deserve, but I still feel it. Otherwise, this episode, I think that, these characters, there's a lot of bearded men in this show that I don't actually know exactly who they are, but I think that Laurie's husband, it's clear that he's seemingly having an affair, and it's possible that he had a relationship with Aaron in the past, but I don't think he's the killer. I think he's another red herring. My one suspicion is that perhaps when it comes out that he was having an affair with Aaron, perhaps it will turn out that Laurie was actually the one who killed Aaron out of some kind of desire to protect her husband and his brother, or his brother. So that's one possibility. I also think it's possibility, obviously I think this is a red herring as well, that it turns out that, Aaron had stayed with Billy at one point, and Mare obviously seems like she's suspicious of this, and she's contemplating on the possibility that he's the father of the child, and it seems like she took his beer bottle, and maybe she's going to do a DNA test to find out. So we'll have to wait and see on that. But again, I think that Billy and John are too obvious. I think it's going to be someone else. Otherwise, Dylan and his crew go and burn Aaron's journals. Clearly, they thought there was something incriminating there, and he takes the money that Aaron had earned somehow, clearly probably through prostitution, although maybe someone gave it to her. It's hard to say. And that he is going to, that he's made this decision, to take this money. And it doesn't seem like he's going to pay for the surgery for Aaron's child. It seems like he's going to keep the money. So kind of a louse. So those are my thoughts on this episode. I thought it was a pretty solid episode of Mare of Easttown. We're winding down, only 2 episodes left. So let's enjoy this final stretch. I feel very, very tense as we go into it, because I feel like there's just not much time left, and I'm not really ready for this show to be over, but at the same time, I really just want to know what the outcomes are already. So let me know what you thought of this episode in the comments. If you're interested in seeing upcoming reviews on this channel, please consider subscribing, and as always, thanks for watching.